everyone, welcome to Quilts on Tour. Today I want to show you how I attach my binding to a quilt, how I make sure I have enough binding, and how I put it all together. There's a really easy method that I found, and I want to share that all with you because I know sometimes binding can be a struggle. So the first thing that we're going to do is get all of our stuff together. So you'll need a pencil. I like mechanical pencils because the points are really sharp, or you can use a friction pen, anything that it will erase, but you're not going to see this, so I usually use a pencil. You'll need a ruler. I just use my 4.5 by 4.5 because it's just a little spot, a rotary cutter, measuring tape, and pins, or I really love using these clippies for my binding. The only time I use a pin is when I attach my things together, and you'll see. So the first thing I want to do is measure my project. So I just have this little advent calendar right here, super cute, but it needs to have the binding put on. So I measure the bottom, and that's 21 inches, and the length is about 31. It doesn't have to be exact because you're going to have extra fabric left over anyways. And to determine how much binding I need, especially when I have a pattern that doesn't show how much binding I need, I use this app called the Robert Kaufman Quilting app. And all I do is I open it up, and I have another video on how to use this app. If you just want to click on the link above, then you'll be able to see what I'm doing here. But it's really easy. You put in the width of the fabric, you put in your binding size. I like 2 1/4, especially on projects that don't have a lot of batting on the sides. 2 1/4 is my favorite. So my width was 21 inches and my length was 31 inches. And I hit calculate. This tells me that I need a total of 114 inches of binding, or 3 strips, which is really cool because then I don't have to calculate it in my head. That doesn't always work out for me. So I've gone ahead and cut out the 3 strips that I need right here. I've sewn 2 of them together, and I want to show you how I sew them together with the last one. So what I usually do is I lay it on my cutting mat here, and it's got a little crinkle in it, so let me iron it really quick. Okay. So I lay it on my cutting mat, and I lay it, along the line, so I make sure that it's straight. Then I take the other end, and you put this side pretty side up. So you want the front of the fabric facing each other. And you overlap them just a little bit like this. And this is when I use pins because I really don't want it to move. So the first thing I do is I pin this side so I know that side stays straight. And then you want to draw a line from this corner to this corner. So I put my ruler down here, and I line it up with that corner to that corner. You don't want to use the corner of the fabric, you're using the corner where the fabrics meet. And then I draw my line. I take my ruler off and try not to move too much. And I just give it a good pin down. So we're just going to sew straight down this line. So I'm going to take it over to my sewing machine and sew it. So here we are. I have my sewing machine all set up. I have a Bernina 770 QE, and I'm using the foot 97D with the dual feed. I really like this foot because it has this bar here that I can swing back and forth to get my 1/4 inch. To get my 1/4 inch guide. It's really nice. I love this guide. But when I'm sewing like on an angle, I have to move it out of the way because it gets in the way. So I usually leave it like this all the time. So we're just going to make sure, put my foot down a little bit. I usually hold the tail, because if you don't hold the tail, it kind of bird's nests underneath and doesn't look very pretty. And you want to make sure that your needle lines up right on the line. So you want to make sure you start at the very edge of your line and go all the way through, because that's what gives you the even look when you unfold it. And if you mess up, it's okay. That's why they make seam rippers. I have ripped out many of binding seams because it was not lined up correctly. All right. Just go slow and take your time along that line. Alright, and there you have it. So I'll take these out, and usually before I cut, I'll open it to make sure that it lines up pretty nicely. And this one is. So then you take it over to your cutting mat, and right on your stitch line, you're going to cut 1/4 of an inch seam allowance. And I also cut off these little tails that are left because you overlapped. It just helps it lay a lot nicer when you unfold it. It gets too bulky. You wouldn't think just that little piece of fabric, but it makes it really bulky in there and hard to get it to lay flat. Yeah. So now I want to iron that seam open. So I always iron it down once to set your seam, and then I open it up. I just give it, I don't want to yank on it, but I give it a little tug just to pull it as far apart as possible. And then open up your seam here. Just iron that down flat. And there you go. Pretty simple, and it's kind of hidden. You can't really see the seam. So the next step is to take all of your binding, fold it in half, and iron it in half. I usually use my bigger ironing board, but for demonstration's sake, we have to use this thing. So I'm going to go ahead and iron this in half, and I'll meet you right back. So after you've got your binding all sewn together, so no matter how many strips you needed, like for me it was 3, but if you're doing a big quilt, you might need 7, 8, 9, 10. So however many strips you need, make sure you sew them all together into one really long piece. So now I'm going to show you how I attach it to the project. I usually start on the right side just because that's how I was taught. If you are left-handed, you can definitely start on the left side or the bottom or the top, but I start the right side because that's how I was taught. You want to start kind of in the middle, but you want to leave a tail. So usually I just clip this here. So you put your salvage ends together. So this side is the fold that we ironed down, so it's finished. And then you lay your edges like this. And I normally, even though I've used the calculator, I normally go ahead and do a quick measure around to make sure that I have enough, because believe it or not, I've used the calculator and still did not have enough because I don't know why. I guess I counted wrong, which again is why math and I don't get along. So I'm just doing quick measurements, because once it's on your quilt, it's going to be really hard to add to make your binding longer. So it looks like I have plenty, which is good. All right. So we're going to take that off. And I'm gonna mark, I'm actually gonna make this tail a little bit longer. I'm gonna put a pin in here where I want to stop, because you want to leave about a good, probably 10 hands width apart, 10 inches maybe, 10, 11 inches between where you start and where you stop. And sometimes I just get going and I forget. So if you put a pin here, then you know that's where you need to stop. And the corners can be a little tricky, but we have 4 to go over, so by the time we're done the 4th one, you'll be an expert. Move this stuff. And I'm gonna swing around my 1/4 inch guide here. Just makes it easier keeping everything straight. If you have a Bernina and you don't have this foot, it's worth its weight in gold. It's just so much easier. So slide this under. We make sure everything's lined up. And I usually will go a few stitches and then go back, because we're going to be tugging on this quite a bit when we go to put the pieces together. Pull that away. Okay. All right, now I'm going to just hold it. It's easier if you kind of hold it straight. I usually stop about every hand's width just to make sure everything's lined up. When you get to the corner, you go down till there's about a 1/4 inch left. And I go back a space or 2 just to tie it off. I'm cutting my thread, but I'm not cutting my binding. I'm going to flip it around, and this is where the tricky part is, because this is where you're going to make your pretty little binding corners. And what you do is you going to make a triangle like this, and you want to make sure your line here is straight and that the point of your triangle lines up with the edge of the other side. So if you go more than 1/4 inch when you end, this point is hard to make. So if you go too far, just kind of pick out a couple of stitches and it'll be easier to line up that point. And then you pull this side down and you make it even with this side. So you can feel that triangle under there. So you're straight here and you're straight here and you're straight here. Everything is lined up. And I go back here. Start sewing. And usually once I get a couple stitches in, I kind of get reset and straighten everything up. When you get down to the corner, make sure you stop about 1/4 inch from the edge. Flip it around. It's a little easier with this piece. When you have a quilt and you're flipping this around, it can get a little hard to manhandle, but it's the same process whether you're using a little piece or a big quilt. You flip it up and make the triangle. Make sure your point lines up with the edge. This is all lined up. And you flip it down and you line up that. So it should all be even here, straight here, and straight here. You don't want it like this. And you don't want it over too far like this. You want to make sure it's all straight because that'll give you your pretty corner when you flip your binding. Make sure you stop at about 1/4 of an inch. This is our third one. We have one more to go after this. You'll be an expert. You'll be able to do it on your own. Flip it up so it's straight. You want to make sure that line here is straight and that the point of your triangle ends at the point there. And fold it down. This fabric is very stringy. So just make sure everything's lined up straight here, and straight here. Last one. So again, make sure you stop 1/4 of an inch from the edge. Flip it around. Make your triangle. Make sure your points end at the corner there so it's even. Pull it towards you. Make sure it's even here, and even here. And just hold my hand here. All right, I'm just going to go back a couple of stitches just to tack it down. All right. Now here comes the fun part, trying to attach these suckers. It took me a while, and the last time I did this, I'm going to confess, I did it the wrong way and I had to take it out and redo it. So even though this is the easy way, it's still, if you're not concentrating, you can get confused. Okay, so the first thing I do is if you fold this in half and pin it, it makes it much easier to work with when you're trying to line up your things. But the first thing you need to do is I fold this part in half like that, at about halfway between the distance. I put this there. Fold that in half. And then you take the other one and you fold it to meet it. But this is where the magic happens. Take my little ruler and I pull them apart about 1/4 of an inch, like this. So there is a 1/4 of an inch space in between the two, like that. I'm just going to clip it down so it doesn't move because I have to slide my ironing pad under it. So the next step is we want to iron this down because we want the creases to be really prominent because that's what we're going to use to line them up. I'm just going to slide that under there. Grab my iron. Just press it down. Try not to iron your clippies. And I'll usually pull it off as well and give it a good press. All right. So the key to remember is to try to keep everything parallel. That's what I forgot last time. So I'm going to fold this up so there's a little less bulk to have to deal with. So I'm going to open this one up, face up, and I don't know if you can see, but because we ironed it, there's a good crease going this way and there's a crease going this way. And that's what we want to line up. So we're going to take this one and we line up. So the crease going this way, we're going to line up with the long crease on this one. And the crease going up and down here, we're going to line up with the crease going this way. So you want to make sure that they're pretty lined up, because that's how this works. And then I'm going to get it a pin so it stays in place. All right. Stretch it out just a little bit. All right. So we want this kind of like when we were adding the strips to each other, you want it on an angle, because that's what kind of makes it invisible. So you want to keep it parallel with your project. You have all your creases lined up. You take your ruler, and again, you're going to draw the parallel line. So you want to make sure it goes through the middle where the creases intersect. Line it up here where they intersect here and where they intersect here. So those are your points. And you draw a line. And then I usually pin it really good because I don't really want this thing to move. All right, and then we're going to take it over to the sewing machine and sew right along that line. So I'm just sewing straight down that line. Again, make sure that you end at the point. Stay right on your lines, and that'll help when you go to unfold it. All right, so I'm going to take out my pins. And before I cut, I open it to make sure I did it the right way. And drum roll, because it might not be the right way.
Is it wrong?
Yeah. I twisted it. So I don't cut the strips until I pull it open to see if I did it right. And I didn't do it right. This side here is twisted. So we got our friendly seam ripper. I call him Jack the Ripper. I'm just going to take this seam out and try again. And that's all you can do, is just do it again. But at least this seam isn't a big long one. Okay, so we've got it figured out, and let me show you how I fixed it, or figured out. So when you unfold your piece to the left, or your starting piece, you want to unfold it and lay it straight down. So the bottom piece is what's towards your project. And your ending piece, you're going to unfold that one with the wrong side facing you. And the top piece is what's going to be facing your project. And then you line up your seams that you ironed, and you draw your line and you sew along that line. And it makes your diagonal. So I'm going to go ahead and cut that off and show you the rest of the steps. And you cut it off at 1/4 inch seam allowance. And you just cut off the little ears there, and it'll help it lay flat. There you go. And then I will iron this open. I'm going to take it over to my ironing mat and iron it open. I'm going to take the clip off of what I had holding my project closer. And as you can see, it's a perfect fit. So then we're going to sew that down. So I have finished sewing it down, all the way down, and I've ironed it open so it lays flat and the edges are nice and crisp. So now I'm going to show you how I wrap it around and how I fold down the corner so it looks nice. So this is where I really love my clips, because you don't have to pin through all these layers and you don't get stabbed when you're working on it. So I just kind of fold it down over like this so it covers your seam here. And when I get to a corner, you just kind of flip it over and it makes kind of like a little cup. And sometimes if there's a lot of material left there, I'll clip it so it's not quite so bulky. You just flip it up. You lay one side down and you pull the other side down. And that gives you a nice little mitered corner there. And then I put a clip on it to hold it. And then you just keep clipping around all the way. So let me show you how I sew it down. I like to hand stitch my binding on. I think it just looks so much better. You don't have to if you don't want to. You can use your sewing machine and just stitch right along here, but just remember, whatever you sew on this side, you're going to see the stitches on this side. So a lot of people try to do the stitch in the ditch so you can't see it as much. I'm not very good at that, and that's why I like to hand stitch it. So let me get my needle and thread ready and I'll show you how I do that. I just use my regular thread that I use on my sewing machine to quilt with. My needle. And I like to make what's called a quilter's knot. You hold your thread here and you put your needle kind of on top of it. And you hold it together like that. And then you wrap your thread around 3 or 4 times. And you hold that bundle together with one finger and thumb. And slide your needle and your thread through. And sometimes it doesn't work. If you don't hold it tight enough, it doesn't work. So let me show you again. So you've got your thread on top of your needle, or your needle on top of your thread, and you just wrap it around 3 or 4 times, and you hold that little swirl there tight and pull your needle and your thread through, and then you have a knot. All right, so to start with, I usually come in the layers between so you don't see the tail. And I come right out underneath my stitch line, because that's where I want to start. And I know it's kind of hard to see the white on white. And I pull this down. And then I take, so my whole stitch I want to be about 1/4 of an inch. So I go into the fold here about 1/8 of an inch, and I come out, and I don't move my needle very far. Like, I don't come out like this and go in. I keep it right, and then go right into my material underneath. And I try to keep it right underneath my stitch line. I don't know if you could see that. So when I pull it straight and pull it out and through, you've taken about 1/4 of an inch seam and you've gone through your top layer and just your white or your backing. And I go right back up where my thread came out into the fold, Again, I only take about 1/8 and go right back into, I don't come out very far. I just go right back into where the white is and only do about 1/4 inch. Just like that. And I go all the way around. And if you stay right underneath your stitch line here, you'll have a pretty even binding when you're done. It'll be even on the front and even on the back. So I use my stitch line as my guide as I go around and sew it down. So I go into the fold and come about 1/8 inch and go straight into right underneath the stitch line and go about 1/8 inch. So my total stitch is about 1/4 inch. Pull it tight. Again, you go into your fold about 1/4 inch, and the less space that you see your needle, the less chance of your thread being seen. But I'm using white, so even if it does kind of pop through, you're not gonna notice it too much. Pull it tight. Just like that. And there you can't hardly see any of the stitches. Thanks for watching. Let me know if you have any questions and make sure you subscribe.